The sun had barely risen when Ethan Parker stepped onto the wooden porch of his small farmhouse on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The air was heavy with humidity, and the low hum of cicadas filled the still morning. Ethan was a quiet man in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered from years of farm labor, but with kind eyes that revealed a gentleness most people didn't expect from someone his size. For most of his life, Ethan had lived among animals. He had grown up on a cattle ranch, tending to calves and horses before he was old enough to drive a truck. When his parents passed away, he sold the ranch and used the money to build something he had always dreamed of, a wildlife sanctuary for animals that didn't belong in cages or circuses. The sanctuary was modest, only about 50 acres, fenced and dotted with strong enclosures, shade trees, and ponds. But for Ethan, it was a kingdom of second chances. Injured hawks, abandoned raccoons, and even a pair of rescued tigers had found safety under his care. Yet the sanctuary's heart belonged to just one animal, Con, the lion. Con had not come to the sanctuary gently. 2 years earlier, a traveling circus had been shut down in Texas for cruelty and neglect. Among the animals seized was a malnourished lion with ribs jutting through his golden hide and a broken spirit dulled by years of chains, beatings, and starvation. Ethan had driven overnight to fetch him. He remembered the first moment he saw Con. The lion lay motionless in the corner of a cramped cage, his eyes half closed, too weak even to growl. Many said the animal would never survive. Ethan refused to believe that. "It's okay, boy," Ethan had whispered through the bars, his voice steady and low, as if speaking to an old friend. "You're safe now." The journey back was long, and Ethan stopped often, sliding raw steaks through the cage door, watching the lion slowly find the strength to chew. By the time they reached Louisiana, Con's eyes burned with something Ethan hadn't seen before, the spark of survival. Life at the sanctuary wasn't easy for Con. For weeks he would not let anyone near him. If a worker approached the enclosure, he roared and clawed at the ground, his muscles tense with fear and fury. But Ethan was patient. He didn't rush, didn't force. Instead, he sat by the fence each day, sometimes speaking, sometimes just humming, letting the lion grow accustomed to his presence. Little by little, Con began to relax. He would eat with Ethan nearby. He stopped growling when Ethan walked past, and one warm evening, after months of patience, Ethan slipped his hand through the bars with a piece of meat. Con hesitated, his great amber eyes locked on the man's steady gaze, and then, gently, almost respectfully, he took the food from Ethan's hand without drawing blood. From that moment on, something shifted. Con still carried the scars of his past, but he began to trust again. Ethan built him a wide, open enclosure with trees and a small pond, a place where Con could stretch, roar, and remember what it meant to be wild. More importantly, Ethan gave him what no circus ever had: dignity. By the time 2 years had passed, the bond between man and lion was undeniable. Ethan could walk alongside Con's fence, and the great beast would follow like a shadow. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of dawn, Ethan would sit cross-legged outside the enclosure, coffee mug in hand, while Con lounged only a few feet away, his mane stirring in the breeze. Visitors often asked Ethan if he feared the lion. Ethan always answered the same. "Fear keeps you careful, respect keeps you alive, but love, that's what keeps us together." Con was no pet. Ethan never forgot that. He was a wild animal, powerful enough to kill with one strike. But Ethan also believed that trust, once earned, was stronger than chains. And in Con's eyes, when they rested on him with calm recognition, Ethan saw not just an animal, he saw a partner. That summer, the skies darkened more often than usual. The Mississippi had been swelling with heavy rains from the north, and weather reports spoke of rising waters and possible floods. For the town, it was a warning. For Ethan, it was a quiet dread. Every night he walked the sanctuary, checking enclosures, reinforcing gates, and piling sandbags near the lower fields. When he reached Con's pen, the lion often padded over, brushing his mane against the chain link, as if sensing Ethan's worry. "Don't you fret," Ethan would murmur, pressing his palm against the fence. "I'll keep you safe, I promise." It was a promise he meant with all his heart. but nature has a way of testing promises. And soon, Ethan would learn that saving Con would demand every ounce of courage he possessed. Part 2. The Rising Storm. The first storm came in early May. At first, it seemed like nothing unusual. Louisiana was no stranger to heavy rains, and Ethan Parker had lived through more than one flood season. But this year, the weather had a different weight to it. The sky stayed gray for days at a time, swollen clouds drifting from the north. The news anchors on the local radio spoke in tense voices about the Mississippi River, already at its limits. Entire towns upstate had begun to evacuate, and the waters pressed harder each day against the levees. For the residents of Ethan's small community, there was only one thing to do: prepare. Families nailed plywood across windows, stacked sandbags near doorsteps, and loaded valuables into pickup trucks. Ethan worked alongside them during the day, but each night he returned to the sanctuary with only one thought on his mind: the animals. Walking the paths of the sanctuary during those tense nights, Ethan could hear the unsettled movements of the animals. The tigers paced their enclosure, tails twitching. The wolves howled as though warning of something unseen. Even the hawks beat their wings restlessly inside the aviary. But it was Con who worried him most. The great lion had grown restless, his deep roars echoing across the fields like thunder. Standing outside the enclosure one evening, Ethan watched Con circle the perimeter, muscles rippling beneath his golden hide. Rain pattered on Ethan's jacket, and the muddy earth squelched under his boots. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" Ethan murmured. The lion stopped packing and stared at him, amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He let out a low rumble, not anger, not fear, but something more primal. It was the sound of a creature who could sense what humans sometimes ignored. Danger was coming. Neighbors in doubt. A few days later, Ethan attended a town meeting held in the high school gymnasium. Dozens of farmers, shopkeepers, and families filled the bleachers. At the front, Mayor Johnston explained the situation. "The Corps of Engineers is monitoring the levees," he said, voice stern. "We've got reports the river will crest higher than in the floods of '93. Evacuations may be necessary." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People glanced at one another, fear and disbelief mixing in their faces. "What about the animals at the sanctuary?" someone asked, and all eyes turned to Ethan. He stood slowly. "I've reinforced the pens," he explained. "I'm moving the smaller animals to higher ground already. If we need to, I'll load the rest into trailers. None of them will be left behind." A woman in the crowd shook her head. "But what about the lion? That thing's dangerous if he gets loose." "He won't," Ethan cut in firmly. His voice carried more weight than usual, filled with a conviction that silenced the whispers. "Con is my responsibility. He'll be safe." The mayor nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. By mid-May, the storms became relentless. Sheets of water hammered the rooftops, and the ditches alongside the roads filled until they overflowed. At night, Ethan lay awake listening to the roar of rain against his windows, his thoughts never straying far from the sanctuary. He built platforms inside enclosures, dragged feed to higher storage sheds, and checked the fence lines until his legs ached. And always, Con watched him. One night, after hours of hauling sandbags, Ethan sat on the wet grass outside the lion's pen, exhausted. Con padded over and crouched beside the fence, so close their faces were only inches apart. "You trust me, don't you?" Ethan whispered, his breath clouding in the damp air. "I don't know what's coming, but I swear to you, I'll fight the river itself before I let it take you." Con blinked slowly, the way lions sometimes do when they're calm, and lay down with a heavy sigh. To Ethan, it felt like an answer. The warning. 3 days later, at dawn, the warning came. The levee miles upriver had breached. Water was spilling into farmland and towns at a terrifying pace. Ethan received the call while feeding the wolves. The sheriff's voice was urgent. "Ethan, you need to evacuate. Now, don't wait for it to hit, you've got hours at best." His stomach tightened. He looked toward the lion's enclosure, where Con stood on a mound of dirt, mane rippling in the morning breeze. "I'll do what I can," Ethan replied, voice steady though his hands shook. The sheriff hesitated. Just be careful. Don't risk yourself for an animal, you hear. But Ethan only hung up, jaw clenched. To him, there was no question. Con was not just an animal, he was family. And Ethan knew the rising storm was about to test every promise he had ever made. The storm that night was unlike anything Ethan had ever witnessed. Thunder rolled like cannon fire across the Louisiana skis, and lightning slashed through the clouds, painting the world in furious flashes of white. The rain was relentless, a solid sheet of water pounding the land as if the heavens themselves had opened. By midnight, the pastures surrounding the sanctuary were already under several feet of water. Ethan waded knee-deep through the R,